After discovering my CEO husband can't let go of his divorced single mother ex, I started teaching our son to call him uncle. At first, it was only something I said out of anger. Then it became a habit. Then it became the only way I could protect my child from breaking apart. One rainy night, our son woke up burning with fever. His cheeks were flushed red, tiny hands clutching the blanket while his body trembled beneath it. I sat beside him with a cold towel, checking the thermometer every few minutes while the clock crept past midnight. Evan had just returned from work and hadn't even loosened his tie when his phone rang. The moment Vivian's name flashed across the screen, I saw the change in his expression. Worry, urgency, softness. Things I hadn't seen directed at me in a very long time. Vivian, he answered immediately. I couldn't hear everything she said, only her crying voice spilling faintly from the speaker. Something about a leaking pipe, a thunderstorm, her son being scared. Evan grabbed his car keys without hesitation. I'll be back soon, he said distractedly. I stared at him for several seconds before lowering my gaze to our feverish son. Then I gently touched his burning forehead and whispered softly, "Say goodbye to Uncle." Our son froze. His eyelashes trembled slightly as he looked between me and Evan standing at the door. For a long time, he didn't speak. Finally, in a tiny voice filled with confusion, he whispered, "Goodbye, Uncle." Evan frowned like the word bothered him, but Vivian called his name again through the phone, and he left anyway. The front door closed. The apartment became painfully quiet. Only the sound of rain tapping against the windows remained. Another time, Evan promised he would attend our son's parent-teacher conference. Our son had been excited for an entire week. He carefully picked out his clothes the night before and even practiced introducing his father to the teacher. I still remembered the proud smile on his little face. "My dad's coming tomorrow," he told everyone. But the next morning, Vivian called crying. Her son was upset because no father would accompany him to school. Evan didn't even finish breakfast before standing up. "Vivian's having a hard time," he explained, already putting on his watch. "Her child is sensitive right now." I didn't argue. I didn't beg him to stay either. By then, I was too tired for that. Without even lifting my head, I unlocked my phone and handed it to my son. "Send your teacher an email," I said quietly. "Tell her your uncle couldn't make it." My son's fingers tightened around the phone. He looked down silently for a long time before typing the words with trembling little hands. Every single time I made him say "Uncle," he hesitated. Like each syllable hurt him. Like he was forcing himself to accept something he didn't want to believe. Until today. 28 days after I found out Evan's heart no longer belonged to our family, something finally broke completely. Ironically, it was Evan who suggested taking family photos together. Probably guilt. Probably compensation. Maybe he had finally realized how much disappointment had accumulated in our son's eyes lately. Our son had been counting down the days for nearly 2 weeks. He even packed his favorite toy dinosaur into his backpack because he wanted it included in the photos. But right as we arrived at the photo studio entrance, Evan's phone rang again. Vivian. Of course it was Vivian. Her sobbing voice came through immediately. "Evan, can you come pick Tanner up from kindergarten? The other kids are making fun of him for not having a dad." I saw Evan's expression shift again. Conflict flashed across his face. Guilt. Hesitation. But never rejection. He crouched down slightly, probably preparing another explanation, another apology, another promise he wouldn't keep. Before he could speak, our son suddenly waved his hand. "It's okay, Uncle." The world seemed to stop. "You should go be with your other kid," he continued softly. His voice sounded natural. Too natural. Like he had practiced those words alone in his room countless times while hugging himself to sleep. "Mom and I are enough for family photos." My breathing stopped for a moment. Beside me, Evan froze completely. Our son looked up at me instead and grabbed my hand with a small smile that looked far too mature for a 7-year-old child. "Mom, let's go," he said gently. "We're gonna be late." Then he pulled me toward the studio step by step. I followed stiffly behind him, my chest feeling so heavy I could barely breathe. It felt as though someone had shoved a stone directly into my heart. I almost couldn't remember how to inhale. I discovered Evan's affair accidentally. That day, he returned home after attending Vivian's son's birthday party. While changing clothes, 3 tickets slipped from his coat pocket onto the floor. Universal Studios. My fingers went cold instantly. For our son's 6th birthday, he had begged Evan to take us there together because he wanted to see the Minions parade. Evan dismissed him immediately. "That's childish," he'd said flatly while scrolling through emails. Our son had smiled awkwardly afterward, pretending he wasn't disappointed. A few days later, Evan took Vivian and her son instead. I found the photos on Vivian's Instagram. The caption read, "The most magical place should be visited with the best daddy." The picture showed Vivian smiling brightly beside Evan while her son sat on Evan's shoulders laughing happily. They looked exactly like a real family. That night, Evan and I had the worst fight of our marriage. I demanded divorce. I demanded custody. Evan accused me of overreacting. "Vivian's divorced," he snapped. "She's raising a child alone. I just feel bad for her." Feel bad. Such harmless words. Such devastating consequences. When he noticed our frightened son standing outside the bedroom door listening to us argue, Evan immediately softened his tone and asked me, "How can you bear letting our son grow up without a father?" At that moment, I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Because he was right. No matter how angry I was, our son loved his father deeply. If I forced them apart immediately, my child would suffer. But I also knew something else. If I forgave this once, there would be a second time, a third, 100th. And every single time, my son would learn he came second to another woman's child. I refused to let that become his future. So instead, I quietly tricked Evan into signing divorce papers. There was a mandatory 30-day waiting period before the divorce became official. I gave him 30 days. If he woke up and chose us, I would pretend none of this happened for our son's sake. But if he didn't, then I would spend those 30 days teaching my son how to survive without him. Today was day 28. And my son had finally called Evan uncle on his own. That should have made things easier. Instead, it shattered me. As we crossed the street outside the studio, Evan suddenly called after us. He looked shaken now, like reality was finally sinking in. He took several hurried steps forward, probably wanting to ask our son why he sounded so distant. Then Vivian called again. "Evan," she cried weakly through the speaker. "Tanner won't stop crying. He says he wants his daddy." Evan stopped walking. For several long seconds, he stared at our backs. Then he sighed softly and answered, "Okay, I'll be there soon." Soon after, my phone vibrated. A message from him appeared. "Let's talk tonight." A moment later, the sound of his car engine echoed through the street before fading away into the distance. Our son stopped walking entirely. Then, he buried himself into my arms. His tiny body trembled violently as tears soaked through my clothes. "Mom," he whispered brokenly, "can we not have daddy anymore?" I closed my eyes tightly. The pain in my chest spread so violently, I almost collapsed right there on the sidewalk. In the end, we never took the family photos. I brought my son home instead. That night, while he quietly organized his toys on the carpet, I packed our luggage in silence. I booked 2 plane tickets back to my hometown. Just as I finished, my phone buzzed again. Vivian had sent me a video. Another photo studio. Another family. Evan wore matching outfits with Vivian and her son while the photographer excitedly guided their poses beneath bright studio lights. The 3 of them laughed together naturally, comfortably, like they had done this 1,000 times before. At the end of the video, Vivian sent her usual smug message. "It's only a family photo. Evan and I can take one anytime." If this had happened before, I would have confronted her immediately. I would have fought for my marriage, for my dignity, for the man I once loved. But now, I only looked toward my son sitting quietly on the floor, carefully arranging his toys into neat little rows while pretending not to cry. And for the first time, I realized something clearly. I didn't want Evan anymore. How ridiculous. I stared at Vivian's message for a few seconds before quietly exiting the chat. Then, without another thought, I booked 2 plane tickets to Seattle for the day after tomorrow. The payment confirmation popped onto the screen. At the exact same moment, the front door opened. Evan walked in carrying a strawberry cake. Both my son and I looked up in surprise. A strawberry cake. For years, Evan hated anything strawberry flavored. He always said it was too sweet, and because of that, even though Leo inherited my obsession with strawberries, every birthday cake in this house had always been matcha mousse, Evan's favorite. Leo once whispered to me during his 5th birthday party while staring longingly at a strawberry shortcake in the bakery display. "It's okay, Mommy. Daddy doesn't like strawberries." I still remembered how hard I had to smile that day. But now, Evan was standing there holding a pink strawberry cake box like it was the most natural thing in the world. Even Leo looked stunned. Father and son stared at each other awkwardly across the living room. Then Evan noticed the luggage beside the sofa. His expression shifted immediately. Tanner was crying pretty badly, he explained as he loosened his tie. I stayed longer to comfort him. His voice softened slightly. On the way back, I remembered you two like strawberry cake, so I bought one. Then his gaze returned to the suitcases. Why are you packing? Going somewhere? I paused briefly before nodding. I guess you could say that. Only 2 days remained until the divorce became official. At this point, I couldn't risk anything unexpected happening. Hearing my answer, Evan visibly relaxed. The tension in his shoulders eased as though he had just escaped some invisible danger. Then he continued, naturally. The photo studio called. They said you and Leo never showed up yesterday. He crouched beside our son, speaking with unusual seriousness. I rescheduled it for tomorrow. I promise this time I won't leave halfway through. Leo paused while arranging his toys. His small hands tightened around a dinosaur figurine before he slowly looked toward me. There was hesitation in his eyes. Hope too. But deeper than that was fear. Fear of disappointment. Fear of believing his father again. The sight made my chest ache. In the end, I sighed quietly. Okay, I said softly. It would only be the last time anyway. The moment I agreed, Leo's eyes brightened instantly, like a wilted flower suddenly finding sunlight again. Really? He asked excitedly. Then he hugged his toys and ran happily back into his room to prepare outfits for tomorrow's photos. After he disappeared, silence returned to the living room. I continued folding clothes into the suitcase. A few moments later, Evan slowly walked over and crouched beside me. He looked hesitant for once, almost uneasy. About what happened yesterday, he began carefully. About Leo calling me uncle. My fingers paused. Evan placed the strawberry cake beside me before speaking in a low voice. Zoe, I know what you're thinking. He looked unusually sincere. You think I care too much about Vivian. You think I've neglected you and Leo. His eyes softened slightly. But Vivian's alone. She's a single mother raising a child by herself. I just don't want her to struggle so much. He reached over and gently took my hand. Then he pressed it against his chest. The steady heartbeat beneath his shirt almost made me lose focus for a second. Give me a little more time, he said quietly. I'll handle things properly with Vivian and Tanner. I promise I won't let you and Leo suffer. I stared at him blankly. It had been so long since he looked at me this seriously. Maybe the last time was our wedding day. Back then, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the chapel, while he held my hands tightly and promised to protect me forever. Or maybe it was the day Leo was born. Inside the hospital room, Evan held our newborn son with trembling arms while tears filled his eyes. Then he kissed my forehead and whispered, Zoe, I'll never let you or our son suffer even a little. Thinking about those memories now felt almost cruel. After a long silence, I finally decided to tell him the truth. Evan, actually Oh, right, he interrupted suddenly, as though he had just remembered something important. Where's that limited edition Lego set I bought Leo last time? The one in the study. I blinked slowly. Evan continued, casually. Vivian mentioned Tanner's really into Legos lately. I'll take it over for him to play with for a few days. My voice died in my throat. Before I could respond, Evan had already walked into the study. A few seconds later, he came back holding the large Lego box our son treasured most. Leo had been waiting nearly a month for Evan to build it with him. Every night before bed, he would ask, Will Daddy have time tomorrow? Tomorrow never came. But now, Evan carried the unopened box toward another child without hesitation. Don't wait up for me, he said while grabbing his car keys. Then the door slammed shut. Bang. The apartment fell silent again. I stared at the closed door for a very long time before finally finishing the sentence I never got to say. Actually, Leo and I don't need you anymore. Only 2 days remained before our flight. That night, after finishing the last of the packing, I collapsed onto the bed from exhaustion. Just as I was about to sleep, my phone lit up. A message from Evan appeared. Tanner loved the Lego set. I spent the whole evening helping him build it. Vivian asked me to thank you. I stared at the screen quietly. At midnight, my husband was thanking me on behalf of another woman. For a moment, I almost laughed. But I was too tired to feel angry anymore. The ending had already been decided. I typed a reply calmly. No need to thank me. I didn't buy it for him. Then after a pause, I added. That Lego set was Leo's favorite birthday gift. He's been waiting for you to build it with him. After sending the message, I turned off my phone and closed my eyes. I didn't care how Evan reacted after reading it. The next morning, Evan unexpectedly came home early. It was only 8 o'clock. The moment he entered, he froze at the sight of the suitcases lying neatly in the living room. "So much luggage?" he asked with a forced smile. "How long are you planning to travel?" Without even removing his coat, he hurried toward the bedroom. There was unmistakable panic in his expression now. I was helping Leo button his shirt and answered calmly, without turning around. "We're going far." Evan immediately looked toward Leo. Only after seeing our son nod obediently did he finally relax. Then, almost as if trying to fix something quickly, he pulled 3 tickets from his pocket. Bright, colorful tickets. Universal Studios. "Haven't you both been upset about before?" he asked carefully. "I bought tickets for today." A smile appeared on his face as he held them up proudly. "The 3 of us can finally go together." For a second, I genuinely thought I had heard wrong. Nearly a month had passed since that incident. Now he suddenly remembered? Then I recalled the dozens of unread messages he had sent after my Lego text last night. And instantly I understood. This was guilt. Compensation. A desperate attempt to smooth things over. I stayed silent and continued fixing Leo's collar. But beside me, Leo's eyes sparkled brightly. "Mom," he whispered hopefully, tugging my sleeve. "I want to go." The excitement in his little face made my heart soften painfully. Before I could answer, Evan cleared his throat awkwardly. "But there's one condition." The air immediately turned heavy. "Vivian found out we're taking family photos today," he explained cautiously. "She's worried Tanner will feel sad if he hears about it." Guilt covered his face again. "So maybe we can skip the family photos this time and take them another day." Leo froze completely. I watched the happiness slowly disappear from his eyes, bit by bit, like sunlight fading from the sky. "I see," he whispered quietly. His head lowered immediately. His small fingers clenched tightly at his sides, but Evan didn't notice at all. Instead, he continued reassuringly. "It's only a tiny request. Vivian's situation is sensitive right now." Then he smiled at Leo. "What do you think, buddy?" He didn't know we were leaving tomorrow. This was his final chance. But neither Leo nor I argued anymore. After a long silence, we both nodded quietly. "Okay." Relief instantly flooded Evan's face. It was almost unbelievable how happy he looked after receiving our agreement. "Great," he said quickly while taking out his phone. "I'll tell Vivian right away." Then he happily sent her a voice message. 3 o'clock at Universal Studios. Afterward, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door again. Right before leaving, he turned around with a warm smile. "Honey Leo, you two are really the best." Neither of us responded. After the door closed, Leo climbed off the bed silently. Then he walked to the closet and pulled out the little backpack he had secretly prepared days ago. His voice was very soft. "Mom." He looked down while hugging the backpack straps tightly. "I don't want to see Uncle anymore." His eyes turned red again. "Can we leave early?" We left before sunrise. I had told Leo we were going on an adventure, that the early morning sky looked different when you were brave enough to watch it. He believed me the way 7-year-olds still believe things, completely and without question, pulling on his little sneakers with the Velcro straps while I loaded the last bag into the taxi's trunk. He held his dinosaur backpack the whole ride to the airport. The green one, Stegosaurus on the front, a small rip along the left strap that I had sewn twice already. I didn't look back at the apartment building as we pulled away. I had promised myself I wouldn't. At the airport, Leo pressed his face against the wide glass wall and watched the planes taxi slowly across the tarmac in the gray pre-dawn light. His breath fogged the glass in small circles. "Mom," he said quietly, "do planes get lonely when they're just sitting there?" I crouched beside him. "I think they're just waiting," I said. "Waiting for the right moment to go somewhere." He considered this seriously, the way he considered most things. "Like us." I tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. "Like us." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I already knew who it was without looking. Evan had been calling since 6 in the morning, 7 missed calls, 14 unread messages. The last one read simply, "Zoe, please." I turned the phone face down on the bench beside me and watched my son breathe fog onto airport glass. We boarded at 7:42. As the plane lifted off the ground and Seattle disappeared beneath the clouds, Leo reached over in his seat and found my hand in the dark of the cabin. He didn't say anything. He just held it. That was when I finally let myself cry, quietly, tilting my face toward the window so he wouldn't see. We were going home. And for the first time in 3 years, Home didn't mean the apartment where Evan left his coat on the chair and forgot to call. It meant wherever Leo and I were together. My mother was waiting at the arrival's gate with a thermos of hot barley tea and an expression that told me she had known something was wrong for months. Mothers always know. She didn't ask questions. She just gathered Leo into her arms and pressed a kiss to his forehead, and then she put her free hand on my shoulder and steered us both toward the car, like we were something fragile she was bringing safely home. We stayed with her for the first week. Her house was small and warm and smelled exactly the way I remembered, garlic and sesame oil and the faint cedar of the closet where she stored winter blankets. Leo slept in my childhood bedroom under a quilt she had sewn herself, surrounded by the small artifacts of a life I had almost forgotten I came from. In the mornings, he helped her water the plants on the balcony. In the evenings, he sat at the kitchen table doing his homework while she cooked, asking her the questions children ask grandmothers: why the sky was orange at sunset, whether fish could dream, if she had ever been scared of anything. Everything, she told him honestly. And then I stopped being scared and just did the thing anyway. He wrote that down in his notebook. I watched from the doorway and tried to memorize it. Evan called every day, sometimes twice. On the fourth day, he stopped calling and began sending voice messages instead, long ones, his voice low and careful in a way I hadn't heard in years. I listened to the first one. He said he had found the Lego box in the study, that he had sat on the floor for a long time after reading my message, trying to remember when he had stopped choosing us, that he wasn't sure when it had happened, only that it had, and that he was sorry. He sounded like the man I had married. I deleted the message and didn't listen to the others. On the seventh morning, I sat across from my mother at the kitchen table while Leo still slept, and she poured me tea, without speaking, and waited. The divorce is final today, I told her. She nodded. How do you feel? I wrapped both hands around the warm cup. Like I finished something, I said carefully. Not like I lost something. Like I finished it. She reached across and covered my hands with hers. Then it's over, she said simply. And somehow, from her, it was enough. Children understand more than we think. I had been careful, those last 30 days. Careful not to speak badly of Evan. Careful to keep my voice steady when I explained that sometimes adults needed time apart. Careful to make sure Leo knew, always, without exception, that none of this was his fault. But children feel the things that words don't say. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after we arrived in Seattle, I found Leo in the backyard sitting against the old maple tree with his dinosaur lined up in a row across his knees. He was talking to them softly. I stood very still near the back door and listened. He always came when she called. Leo was explaining to the Stegosaurus. Every time, even when we needed him. He paused. But that's okay, he said. Because now it's just me and Mom, and she doesn't need him either. The Stegosaurus, of course, said nothing. Leo picked it up and studied it in the afternoon light. She always came when I called. I went back inside before he could see me standing there. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time with the water running, not washing anything. That evening I asked him if he wanted to talk about his father. He shrugged in the small, careful way that means yes, but I'm not sure how. Do you miss him? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. I miss who I thought he was, he said finally. 7 years old. 7 years old, and already learning to grieve the gap between a person and the idea of them. I pulled him into my arms and held him tighter than I meant to. That's a very grown-up feeling, I told him. I know, he said into my shoulder. It kind of hurts. I know, baby. Does it stop? I thought about my mother, and her thermos of barley tea, and the way she had never once said your father's name with bitterness, even though she had every right to. It changes, I said honestly. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you. He was quiet again. Then, okay, I can do that. And I believed him completely. He arrived on a Tuesday. I hadn't told him our address, but I suppose there were only so many places I could have gone, and he had always been thorough when he wanted something badly enough. Leo was at school. My mother had gone to her garden club. I was alone in the kitchen with a mug of coffee and a half-finished novel when the doorbell rang, and there he was on the other side of the screen door, thinner than I remembered, suit jacket traded for a gray sweater, holding nothing in his hands. We looked at each other through the screen for a long moment. You could have called, I said. You wouldn't have answered. That was true. I opened the door and let him stand in the kitchen because it was cold outside and because I was tired of cruelty, even the small justified kind. He didn't sit down. He stood near the window with his hands in his pockets and looked around the room like he was trying to understand a map keys. How is he? Evan asked. Good, I said. He made a friend at school. A boy named Marcus who also has a dinosaur collection. They spend recess comparing facts. Something passed across Evan's face that I couldn't quite name. Zoe, he started. Don't, I said, not unkindly.
He stopped.
I poured a second mug of coffee, set it on the counter near him, and sat back down with my book. Not to read, just to have something to do with my hands. I ended things with Vivian, he said. 2 weeks ago. Completely. I turned a page I hadn't read. That has nothing to do with us, Evan. I know, he said quietly. I'm not saying it as a bargain. I'm saying it because you should know. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw what I had spent the last 30 days learning to see clearly. A man who had made choices and was only now beginning to understand what they had cost. Not a villain. Not a monster. Just a man who had looked away at the wrong moments for too long until looking away became habit. I didn't hate him. That surprised me a little.
Leo loves you, I said.
That won't change. Whatever you build with him from here, that's between you and him. I won't stand in the way of it. Evan's jaw tightened. And you? I closed the book. Me, I said simply, is not a conversation we need to have anymore. He left an hour later.
He didn't beg.
He didn't make promises. Maybe he was finally learning that some things, once finished, cannot be reopened keys. Or maybe he just understood me, at last, the way he should have all along. In March, we found an apartment of our own. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted lemon trees. Leo chose the bedroom with the slanted ceiling because it reminded him of a treehouse. We painted his room together one Saturday morning, both of us in old clothes with rollers that left streaks of blue on our arms and foreheads. He chose the color, Storm Cloud, the label said, though it looked more like the sea to me. He called it exactly right. We put his dinosaurs on a shelf above the desk. We hung his drawings on the wall, wild, joyful things, all color and motion, the kind of art that doesn't try to look like anything and somehow ends up looking like everything keys. In the center of the biggest wall, we hung a frame. Our photo from the studio. Just the 2 of us, Leo and me, taken on the day we finally went back, a month after arriving in Seattle. He had worn his blue striped shirt and held his Stegosaurus and smiled like someone who had decided to be happy and meant it. I was smiling too, not the careful smile of someone managing their grief in public. A real one, the kind I had almost forgotten I had. On the back of the frame, in Leo's handwriting, still crooked, still earnest, he had written, Mom plus me equals family. I stood in front of it for a long time the evening we hung it. Then Leo appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing one eye. Does it look straight? He asked. Perfect, I told him. He shuffled over and stood beside me, and we both looked at it together. This small square of light and color that held the 2 of us, whole and unbroken. After a moment, he slipped his hand into mine. Mom, yes, I'm glad it's just us in the picture. I squeezed his hand. Me too, baby, I said softly. Me too. People ask me sometimes, cautiously over coffee, the way people approach subjects they think might hurt, whether I regret those 30 days. Whether I think I should have fought harder, sooner. Whether the year of overlooked choices might have ended differently if I had spoken up louder. I don't think so. I think some endings are not failures but completions. I think there are marriages that simply finish, not because love was never real, but because one person quietly chose something else for long enough that the love had to go somewhere, and it went into a child instead, poured itself completely into the small, serious face of a boy who lines his dinosaurs up by size and asks whether fish can dream. Evan sees Leo on weekends now, when Leo wants to go. There is no bitterness in the handoffs, no performance of civility thinly veiling rage keys. Just 2 people who were once something to each other, handing a child between them carefully, the way you carry something you both still love even if you no longer love each other. Leo does not call him uncle anymore. He calls him dad, in the distant, newly calibrated way of children who have had to recalibrate, with appropriate warmth and appropriate distance, and the particular wisdom of someone who has learned not to give more than is returned. I think that breaks Evan's heart a little, every time. I think it should. As for me, I have my lemon tree courtyard, and my morning coffee, and my half-finished novels keys. I have my mother's phone calls on Tuesday evenings. I have a job I have returned to, slowly rebuilding the version of myself that existed before I became someone's wife and started shrinking to fit. And I have Leo, who comes home from school and drops his backpack, The green one, Stegosaurus, newly sewn strap, and calls out mom. The way children call out that word when they know, with complete certainty, that someone is always going to answer. I always answer. Some nights, after he's asleep, I stand in the doorway of his storm cloud room and listen to him breathe and think about all the things I want him to know by the time he's grown. That love is not proved by presence alone, but by consistency. By choosing, again and again, the same people, especially when something easier is calling from another room. That a family is not determined by photographs or legal documents or matching outfits under studio lights. It is determined by who stays. He will learn these things. He is already learning them, in the slow, experiential way that children learn everything that matters, not from being told, but from being shown, every ordinary day, by the person who answers when he calls keys. I used to be afraid of what I was teaching him. Now I understand. I was teaching him that he was enough, that we were enough, that when the world asks you to accept less than you deserve and call it love, you're allowed to put down your luggage, take your child by the hand, and walk out the door towards something better. Even if you have to build that something yourself, one room at a time, starting with a storm cloud blue and a shelf of dinosaurs and a photo on the wall that says, Mom plus me equals family, and meaning it.
The moral of the story is, if your young son is burning with a severe midnight fever, but you immediately grab your keys to fix a leaking pipe for your crying ex-girlfriend, don't be shocked when your wife calmly tells the child to say goodbye to Uncle. If you act like a guest, expect to be demoted in the family tree.